Although Shilian had certainly lived his days as someone who was impotent, pretending not to have the thing, and truly losing the thing forever was still fundamentally different. Startled, a thin sheen of cold sweat covered his body as he shouted, "Dodge!" Just as the word left his lips, that blade was pulled out of the ground, and Shilian instantly took that chance to move forward. Immediately after, he pulled at Shiching Xuan and cried, "Watch out!" The blade plunged down again and slashed right before Shiching Xuan. It practically pierced down right next to his head, and if it wasn't for Shilian pulling him back in time, he would have been nailed to the ground on the spot. He exclaimed, terrified, "That was close. How did you know that was where it would come down?" "Don't know, I guessed," Shilian said. It was pure instinct. When it came to killing Aura, he was trained to the point of being able to react without thinking. Soon after, a second, third, and fourth blade all came plunging down, each of the sharp, shining blades blocking the three's way out and the way back. A huge explosion soon followed, and violent tremors came from above, causing dust and debris to rain down. "They've opened fire from above," Shilian shouted. Each booming sound was becoming louder and louder, and the tremors were also growing each time, obviously coming closer and closer. There were sharp blades blocking them from the front and from the back, and they were all keen and sharp, young, treasured swords. Feng Xin was a senior, so who knew if it could fight them head-on? Mingyi took out the crescent moon-shaped shovel from who knows where and started digging at the side wall in that tiny space with great difficulty. Next to him, Shiching Xuan was so exasperated that he was going to spew his soul out. "Mingshang, can you even do this?" he asked. "Mingshang, can you hurry up? It's all your fault for not using the spiritual device for so long. You gotta be more intimate with your devices, all right? Look how stiff and rusty it's become." To be fair, having it become rusty was forgivable. After all, there really weren't any other heavenly officials besides Shilian who could do something like carry a shovel in and out, everywhere, every day, without feeling ashamed. Veins popped on Mingyi's forehead. "Shut up," he yelled. Shilian hastily intervened. "Don't be mad, don't be mad." The tunnels dug through. Sure enough, the moment Mingyi put pressure on his shovel, a hole opened up before them. With the shovel raised, he burrowed crazily ahead, while Shiching Xuan, in the middle, cheered him on crazily. As the only non-crazy person, Shilian brought up the rear. That treasured shovel of the Earthmaster was indeed magical, and with only a few strokes, a new tunnel of over 10 meters was dug. After a while, when he looked back, the hole was gradually closing up on its own, but above the place where they were trapped, a thin light leaked down. Shilian immediately spoke up. "It's going to drill through." Instantly, Mingyi picked up his pace and burrowed even crazier. Suddenly, his movement stopped, and he looked up. Shilian reacted the same way, because they both sensed it. It was completely silent above them, without any movement. It should be an empty palace above. Since their tunnel was already discovered, they should get out first before trying anything else. Mingyi changed his direction and started digging upward. "Are you too sure this place really has no one that will see us when we get out?" Shiching Xuan asked. "Haven't heard anything, unless they're sleeping," Mingyi replied. Of course, heavenly officials usually didn't need to sleep, never mind sleeping in the middle of the day, so that possibility shouldn't exist. Yet who knew that the moment Mingyi's shovel broke through and the three emerged, poking their three heads out, inhaling the fresh air, before they even exhaled, across from them they saw a bed, and upon the bed was a youth with his arms and legs sprawled out, soundly asleep. They were actually heavenly officials who slept in the middle of the day. Roused by movement, the youth rolled over and sat up, his curly hair a bird's nest from his slumber. He furrowed his brows and scratched his head, watching the three heads from across his bed with sleepy eyes, looking like he couldn't understand why such things would appear in his palace. The three pretended like nothing was the matter and hastily crawled out of the hole. However, just as Shi Qingshuan almost crawled out, he suddenly cried out, and Shi Lian looked back. There was a hand that had caught his ankle. The owner of the hand was Pei Ming. Even if he was in a tunnel, he was still courteous. "I was just gonna ask which little mouse was burrowing under my palace," he said. "Qingshuan, why are you out and about? Where are you going? You know how your brother gets when he's mad. Hurry back before he finds out." Ria flew out and struck that hand away. Pei Ming hopped out and said, "Your Highness, Lord Earthmaster, do you two have nothing better to do? Encouraging the Windmaster to run away from home for no reason is quite preposterous, isn't it?" Lord Windmaster might be Lord Watermaster's younger brother, but he has still been a heavenly official for hundreds of years. "General Pei, please don't speak as if he has no more than 3, Shi Lian said. "If we are going to talk about reason, to imprison a heavenly colleague for no reason, no matter how you spin it, it's still Lord Watermaster who's acting preposterous, wouldn't you say?" If his guess wasn't wrong, then the Windmaster really couldn't stay in the upper court any longer. Chuan Yizhen was still on his bed, watching them with a dazed look, seemingly still confused by the whole situation. Pei Ming raised his sword and said darkly, "Qi Ying, stop looking and come give me a hand. Apprehend them first." After some contemplation, Chuan Yizhen actually decided to assist. He leapt down, picked up the bed that he was just lying on, and hurled it at Pei Ming. He did indeed give a hand, only it was to help Shi Lian and company. That bed crashed into the unsuspecting Pei Ming, and he was flabbergasted. "Qi Ying," he yelled, "why did you hit me?" Chuan Yizhen waved his hand at Shi Lian, probably gesturing for them to hurry and leave. Shi Lian and company were stunned for a moment before hastily making their way out. Maybe Shi Qingshuan was injured and didn't have the energy, but he only jogged a few steps before his face turned pale, so Shi Lian came around to help pull him up. However, Ming Yi pulled him over directly and carried him up on his back. Shi Lian placed his hand on the door, dug out 2 dice, and turned back to that youth. "Thanks so much," he said. Chuan Yizhen was still bashing at Pei Ming wildly, his moves viciously aggressive, without method. If it wasn't for Pei Ming's own skills, if it was anyone else who was taking this beating, their heads would have been covered in blood by now. Pei Ming's veins were popping all over, and he yelled, "Guards, stop them!" Yet before he called for guards, Shi Lian had already tossed out the dice, opened the door, and charged out. He shut the door behind him, slipping the heck out of heaven. However, what he had never expected was that after he closed the door and turned around, what appeared before him was a Huachang with one leg up, stepping on a new donation box. His upper body was bare, and he was wiping at his sweat. One little run-down Puchi shrine couldn't possibly hold this many prominent figures, and Shi Lian felt like he was going to suffocate. There was also one possessed outside, howling unsuspectingly, creating noise. "Goosey, come give Dad's legs a little massage chop." It was a moment before Huachang tossed aside the erming that he was using to shave wood and raised his brows slightly. The color of his skin and the curves of his bare upper half were exceedingly beautiful, extremely eye-catching, so much so that Shi Lian's eyes were going to fall out of their sockets. Even if he didn't actually see anything properly, he still couldn't stop the blood rushing to his head, making his eyes go dark. Shilin fumbled and tumbled to his side, opened his arms wide, blocking Ming Yi and Shi Qingshuan's view. He yelled, "Close your eyes! Quick, close your eyes!" The faces of the other two stiffened, and they watched him with an odd look. Hua Chang placed his hand on Shilian's shoulder and said, laughing, "Gogo, why are you so nervous?" Only then did Shilian snap out of it. That's right. What was he all nervous for? Hua Chang wasn't a lady, so what if he was laboring, half naked? Still, he didn't drop his arms, doing his best to cover Hua Chang completely. Just put on some clothes, he said. Hua Chang shrugged and said, as Gogo wishes. Then he calmly grabbed for a shirt, slowly putting it on, taking his time. Watching him look all nonchalant and languid, Shi Qingshuan said awkwardly, sorry for the intrusion. I didn't thank you guys." He laughed. "You two are pretty much. Anyway, He laughed again. "My lord, if you have something to say, then just say it. So if there's any misunderstanding, I can explain. Don't just laugh instead," Shilian said. They were pressed for time, and Pei Ming might pursue them all the way over here, so they couldn't stay in Puxi Shrine for long. Ming Yi put on Shi Qingshuan and started drawing the distance shortening array on the ground. Shilian was just about to ask where they were going when he suddenly heard Hua Chang behind him. Shilian remembered his advice regarding not getting close to the Wind Master and company, and turned to him in spite of himself. "Sorry about all of this, Sun Lang," he said. Hua Chang had already finished dressing himself and replied, "I already knew that you wouldn't just stand back and watch." After a pause, he then smiled and said, "But why should Gogo apologize to me? You remembered what I said a few days ago, but did you forget something else that I told you?" Shilian was slightly taken aback, wondering what. Suddenly, he remembered that night at the Green Ghost's lair, the thing Hua Chang had told him. Just keep doing what you want to do. After having remembered, Shilian blinked, not knowing what else to say, only knowing that he suddenly wanted to do something for Hua Chang. Yet at the moment, there really wasn't anything that he could do for him. Feeling a little discouraged, he suddenly noticed the collar of Hua Chang's red robes and said, "Wait." Then he rushed up to help Hua Chang fix his collar. It turns out the collar of the robe that Hua Chang had randomly put on wasn't properly flipped out. Having fixed it, Shilian inspected him for a moment before smiling. "There," he said. Hua Chang smiled too and said, "Thanks." A small voice inside Shilian's head echoed, "I'm the one who should be thanking you." On the other side, the other two seemed to not be able to look over anymore. Even the circle drawn under Ming Yi's hand didn't seem so round any longer. Once he finished drawing the array and the door was open again, Shilian had thought that he would see some gloomy cave or some spectacular palace. Unexpectedly, outside the door was a large expanse of farming fields. Far in the distance were lush green bamboo groves and verdant mountains, and farmers were scattered through the fields, laboring. There was also a large, glistening buff ox ploughing. The scenery almost made Shilian think that they were still in Puchi village, and he was stunned for a moment. Ming Yi had already walked out with Shi Qingshuan on his back. Hua Chang also stepped out before him. The four walked along the ridge of the fields, and maybe it was all in his mind, but that black ox seemed to be staring at them the entire way. After walking for a bit, they found a small cottage. After the four entered and sat down, Shi Qingshuan blew out a long breath. Are we not fleeing anymore? Tian asked. What if General Pei chases us here? He Chang looked at the outside for a while, focusing especially on that black ox before closing the door. He said nonchalantly, Don't worry, he wouldn't dare mess with the master of this land. There's no benefit to it. Even the water tyrant won't be able to do anything rash. Tian contemplated, but still spoke up. Sun Nang, this whole thing is a mess, and probably implicates too much in the heavenly court. It may be best if you don't hang around. However, He Chang only chuckled. What goes on in the upper court has nothing to do with me, he said. I'm only sticking around with you to sightsee. Suddenly, Shi Qingshan spoke. You should all stop hanging around. The other three in the cottage all looked to him, and Shi Qingshan continued. His Highness is right. This whole thing is a mess, and there's too many involved. I'm going to stay shut up here. My friends, there's no need to help anymore. Let's end it here. However, Tian said slowly, Lord Windmaster, whether things end here isn't up to you. It's up to Lord Watermaster and the Reverend of Empty Words. Hearing this, Shi Qingshan's face stiffened. Tian added, Lord Windmaster, I have a question. I hope you won't mind. What question? Shi Qingshan asked. Tian replied, Does the Reverend of Empty Words have something held over your and Lord Watermaster's heads? Shi Qingshan's face was paling. That night, at the terrace of Cascading Wine, Tian had already set up an extremely secure defense array. As long as Shi Qingshan didn't open the door to leave, he wouldn't be harmed. Yet why did he take the initiative to open the door? Unless someone connected to his private communication array, and the first thing that came out of their mouth was blackmail, giving Shi Qingshan no room to fight nor raise alarm, and he could only follow as instructed. Tian sat down by the table and said, I'm more inclined to think that it's blackmail against Lord Watermaster, because I believe that he hadn't initially known whatever has transpired. This was why his reaction was so strong after having learned, generating such a sharp rejection against the upper court, such that he would rather descend into the mortal realm to become a drifting vagabond than to stay in the heavens as a god. Ming Yi frowned. What blackmail? He asked. Shi Qingshan wasn't a gullible fool. If he fell victim to someone and lost his power, the normal reaction should have been rage, a drive to investigate the truth, or lashing out at the culprit. Yet he did none of that. There was rage, but it wasn't directed at the Reverend of Empty Words, but against his own older brother, and to others he only said, This ends here. This was all entirely abnormal, unless it was under one special case, namely that Shi Qingshan's ascension itself was abnormal in the first place. To go against the heavens and alter fate, to raise someone who couldn't descend upon the divine altar, was outrageously audacious, a treacherous heresy. Tian had never heard of something like this. If this was true, and it got out, it would for sure cause a tidal wave. Just think, everyone wished to ascend, but if anyone could use such a method, the laws of the universe would be rendered irrelevant, completely worthless. This conjecture might be absurd, but the more he thought, the more it made sense. Ever since Shi Qingshan was born, the Reverend of Empty Words had clung on to him, and the only way to escape was to ascend. Miraculously, he ascended. In a mere few years, a pair of blood brothers ascended one after the other. What a beautiful tale. But also, what a coincidence. Tian had never wanted to question the reality of Shi Qingshan's ascension. But if the Windmaster had ascended naturally, how could his power be so easily sucked dry? If it was so easy for a monster to turn a god into a human, who knows how many heavenly officials would have already fallen victim. Unless Shi was mortal in the first place. Unless, when the Windmaster ascended, the Watermaster did something underhanded. Aggressively using rare treasures and devices to help the path of cultivation wasn't out of line. To ascend by way of massacre and battle in times of power change within the mortal realm wasn't out of line either. After all, the fate of the world was thus. Honor must be accompanied by blood, and after ascension, all was wiped clean. However, some things would be out of line if a mortal or some heavenly official did something underhanded, conducted evil rituals to harm the lives of others for the sake of having someone ascend. That would be a completely different matter. Tian asked in a low voice, "Lord Windmaster, the night you ascended, was it the eve of the last day of autumn?" A brief moment later, Shi inhaled deeply and said, "Yes." After a pause, Shi continued, "I remember that day when we were in the town of Fugu, eve of the last day of autumn. Wasn't that the same day I ascended? I had wanted to ask you guys about it at first, to see if that might be a clue, or if it was connected somehow. Maybe it was a coincidence, but it felt hollow, so I ended up not asking. But now you know if it's related." It is related, of course. It's very related. Why did the Reverend of Empty Words choose that day to first send Shi to the town of Fugu to watch that bloody fire social parade, then bring him to the terrace of Cascading Wine to maim? Of course, it wouldn't go through all of that pain for no reason. Shilin connected the timing and the two places together. Many years ago, on the eve of the last day of autumn, in the town of Fugu, a mortal named Scholar He broke down and murdered countless many. Also, on the eve of the last day of autumn, at the terrace of Cascading Wine, Shi ascended. With this, it was more than obvious what the Reverend of Empty Words was trying to say. Shi your ascension had everything to do with the death of the hero of this bloody fire social. That dreadful but logical conjecture that Shilian formulated was this. After Shiwudu ascended, in order to have Shi escape the Reverend of Empty Words, he secretly found a mortal who matched all the requirements and conducted an evil ritual, making that man take Shi misfortune in his place. That man was no doubt the impoverished, exceptionally clever, yet somehow endlessly unlucky to the point where his family was ruined, Scholar He. Scholar He took on Shi name, and the Reverend of Empty Words was deceived. Then, that meant that his original fate was taken by Shi That same night, before the last day of autumn, one experienced a taste of hell on earth, the other, under immensely powerful protection, successfully ascended. Yet the original fate of those two was completely opposite.